Welcome to episode 154 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm going to share a bit about my book writing process, what I'm working on now, what my writing process is like, and how I publish my books. Visit truthforteachers.com to get the transcript or to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're a long-time or regular listener, I would love for you to also share your thoughts by leaving a review on iTunes. Every review helps make the show more discoverable for other educators so they can benefit from it too. I really appreciate your help in spreading the word about this podcast. So I've gotten a lot of requests to talk about how I write and publish books. Some of these requests are from people who are interested in publishing their own book and hoping to get some good insights. And others are people who just like to read what I've written and they're curious about what happens behind the scenes. So if you fall into either of those two camps, this episode should be pretty enjoyable. I'm going to talk first about what I'm writing currently, how the idea for this book came about, and what purpose I hope it serves for you as the reader. And then I'll share a little bit of insight as to my writing and publishing process. So if you've been following me for a while, you know that my current book has been a long time in the making. It has taken me longer to write this book than any other. This is number 5 for me, so you'd think it would get faster and easier. Not necessarily. My last book, Unshakable, was the easiest one to write. It came together the quickest. But it all depends on how the ideas flow and fit together. The more neatly that the ideas fit into categories, which then become chapters, the simpler it is for me to know how much to say and where to put all the different, types of information. This current book has been a beast to write because every piece of it is interrelated and overlapping. It's called Fewer Things Better: The Courage to Focus on What Matters Most. For each of my books, I'm always trying to answer a question. So for example, in my third book, which is called Awakened, Change Your Mindset to Transform Your Teaching, the question that I was trying to answer really for myself before I even answered it for the people reading the book is this: how is it possible for a teacher to develop a positive mindset, even if that doesn't come naturally, and change their perception of the job so it feels less stressful? In my last book, Unshakable, I wanted to answer this question: how is it possible to enjoy teaching every day, no matter what? And now in Fewer Things Better, I'm trying to answer this question: how is it possible for teachers to figure out their priorities and have the courage to align their time accordingly, even in a really busy, distracting, overworked society and school system that's constantly pulling them away from what matters most? For all of my books, I have the answers to these questions just sort of rumbling around in my brain, but I can't articulate those answers in a clear and coherent way until I write the book. I discover how I really feel and what I really think through the process of writing, because it allows me to do a really deep dive into the topic and immerse myself in thoughts about it until I've, sort of sorted through all of the ideas completely and made a strong case for every point. Some of the ideas that I have don't really hold water or they're contradictory, but I can't really see that until I've tried to justify and explain it within the context of everything else in the book. And that's what makes the writing process really laborious at times, because I'm not the type of writer who knows everything she wants to say before she starts writing. It would be much easier if I could do it that way, but I never do. I might have an outline, sort of like for this podcast, but until I start writing, I don't know everything that needs to be said. So what's tricky about this current question in particular, the Fewer Things Better question about priorities and time, is that the answer is not straightforward. For Unshakable, I identified the 20 things that I did as a teacher that were most effective in helping me enjoy my work, and then I wrote a chapter about each. Fewer Things Better did not work that way. I tried to make it work that way for a long time because it's just a good format. It's easy for me as a writer. It's easy for you as a reader. People really liked that. But yeah, this book just wasn't going to happen that way. The idea is that there's just not enough time for everything that matters, right? So if you do fewer things, then the things that remain can be done even better. But the solution isn't as simple as just deciding to cut out everything that's unnecessary. I can't just list those things out for you. It's going to be very individual for different people, but it's also just not that simple any more than losing weight is as simple as cutting out all the unhealthy foods that make you gain weight. If it were just that easy, then we would all be eating healthy and clean and be at our ideal weights. We'd all have sufficient downtime. We'd all be relaxing and enjoying ourselves. Doing fewer things better is complicated in the sense that, we have emotions that pull us away from making rational choices and doing the things that we know we need to do for ourselves. We have excuses that hold us back. We have limiting beliefs. We have exceptions. We have extenuating circumstances, all of which keep us from moving toward our goals. There's also school norms and societal norms that impact our choices about how our time is spent. And there are systemic issues. There's bureaucratic restraints. There are inefficient instructional methodologies, all kinds of other things that create a disconnect between what you want your life as a teacher to look like and what it's actually like. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of barriers that I'm trying to break through in this book so that you can truly give yourself permission to do fewer things better and feel really confident about that choice. When you truly understand what is the most impactful and meaningful way to spend your time, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, then you have this sense of clarity and focus. And that's what gives rise to the courage that's needed to release things that aren't serving you well and to open yourself up to a new approach to the way you spend your time. This question that I'm trying to answer through this book and how to do this, how to have this courage, was born out of my work in coaching teachers over the last few years, both in schools and also through the 40-Hour Teacher Workweek Club. The club is actually what made me curious about this question for the book. And that's because we've had over 25,000 teachers go through the program now. They all have the same resources. Why is it that they don't all get the same results? Why is it that some teachers hear a strategy and they're like, yes, I'm just going to jump right on it. I'm going to start doing this tomorrow. Right away, we're doing this. And other people procrastinate or focus on all the ways that the idea wouldn't work for them. Why are some teachers able to draw really clear boundaries and say no, while others struggle? Why do some teachers create permanent lifestyle changes and bring themselves into balance on a regular basis, while others do okay for a while and then sort of fall off the wagon? Why do some fall off the wagon and jump back on, and some just stay off? I have been experimenting with the answers to those questions for years. I think they're fascinating. I have watched and coached teachers through all kinds of struggles. I've seen what's holding them back. And it's almost always a mindset shift that is required. They might think that nothing will change unless their principal stops being unreasonable, or the state stops requiring them to do so much, or their husband starts doing more around the house. But there's always a personal mindset shift which will get the ball rolling for change. Every breakthrough involves seeing the problem through a more holistic lens and stepping into your power, recognizing where you actually do have some control and using your agency to create change. That breakthrough process is just one of my favorite things to watch and learn from. I never get tired of it. And that's what I have been doing for years with teachers in all different kinds of contexts, from literacy coaching and math coaching, which I used to do, tech coaching. I love those kinds of breakthroughs. And recognizing how teachers get to that breakthrough part is really what has brought me to want to write Fewer Things Better. It's a guide to the mindset and habits of teachers who have the courage to focus on what really matters most and truly let go of the rest. So I'm going to talk about that courage here in a second, but let me just say quickly, if you're wondering if this book is like a duplicate or an overlap of the club materials, no, it's not. This is the mindset behind the club materials. It's the way that I was thinking about a teacher's workload and work-life balance when I created the club, and the things that I've learned about what traits and habits are required for teachers to create change through the club. So if you are a club member or you're a graduate of the club, this book will be about 90% new to you, and it will help you take your results to the next level and deepen your practice and your habits. And if you never join the club, you don't need to in order for this book to make sense. It will benefit you regardless. I know some people don't want or need or just can't afford a year-long program with all the resources needed to simplify. And I think that this book will be really useful for folks who are interested in this topic, but not in joining the club. So I picked the title for this book about maybe 2 years ago. And I'll tell you honestly, my heart sank when I realized that I needed to write this book because I knew how much work it was going to be. Every single time I publish a book, I say to myself afterwards, that's it. That's my last book. I'm never doing that again. That's all the books I have in me. It's all that I have to say. But when the inspiration strikes, I can't avoid it. When the idea for a book comes to me, I have to write it eventually. It doesn't feel like a choice. I will go crazy with those questions and disjointed answers bouncing around in my brain without a coherent logical pairing or an articulate summary of the response. I have to do that deep dive and figure out what I truly believe and what I truly know to be true about the topic. So that's how I felt about this book. I don't remember the exact moment when I was inspired to write it. I was probably ranting about something, someone, and feeling really passionate about someone's time being wasted or someone's time being misused, and fewer things better just popped into my head. I bought the domain immediately because I knew I would have to write this book at some point. So the title was easy, but the subtitle was a lot harder. I've been struggling with that for a while. Teachers in the club know that. I couldn't figure out a subtitle that really explains my intent and focus of the book. And I kept asking them for feedback and polling them on which one would be best. And all the while, I knew that none of the options were right. Because when it's right, I just know. I know immediately deep in my soul, just like I knew I wanted to call it Fewer Things Better. I didn't have to ask anybody. I got some feedback on it, but I knew in my heart that's what I wanted it to be. Subtitle, I probably spent 15 hours brainstorming the subtitle. While driving, walking, brushing my teeth, making the bed, I was just thinking about it on and off for weeks, really. And finally, my mind just opened up one day. I was getting out of the bathtub and I just knew the courage to focus on what matters most. I guess subconsciously, my brain was still sort of working on it, and that's what I came to. And this is the reason why I think that subtitle is good. The problem with anything related to simplifying for teachers is that some people will immediately bristle. They will immediately think you're telling them to shortchange kids and take the easy way out. So I needed the subtitle to make it clear this is not for teachers who hate teaching and are counting down into retirement. I'm not advocating for teachers to sit at their desks, passing out worksheets and waiting until 3 p.m. so they can be the first ones out of the lot to go get a pedicure. What I'm advocating here is not a lazy move, and it's not easy. And in fact, it's a lot harder in some ways than the way that most people do life, because it's not the normal status quo approach. It's easier to just stay constantly busy, do what you're told, emulate what everyone else around you is doing. But it takes time and effort to figure out what really moves the needle for the students in your classroom. What's most important for them? And it's not easy to question school norms that aren't in children's or teachers' best interests. It's not easy to break from norms in your family or community or society. All of these kinds of norms can be keeping you from having a meaningful, fulfilling life and really living out your legacy. But breaking from those norms is hard. It takes courage to do these things because most people are not doing them. Most people settle for the status quo. It takes courage to prioritize rest and relaxation when we live in a culture that tells us that our value comes from producing things for other people and squeezing more productivity out of every single second. It takes courage to disrupt institutional structures and push back against gender norms that impact our profession and our lives as women. It takes courage to subvert the educational system that is exploiting you for free labor and keeping you so distracted by proving your value through data and documentation that you have no time and energy for making meaningful connections with your students. Disrupting the status quo and questioning norms takes courage. And Fewer Things Better is a book that I hope will help you develop and stand strong in that kind of courage so that you can live and teach in really purposeful, intentional ways. So it's part practical strategies and tactics, part personal examples. You know in my books, if you've read any of the others, that I always share my own successes and failures. There's a few stories from other teachers, and there's lots and lots of mindset shifts to help you think outside the box and make conscious choices about how you are spending your one precious life. Doing things better, doing fewer things better will always take courage because it will invite criticism. And that's been true for me. It always has been when I was a teacher. It still is. Sometimes random people on the internet will criticize me for making a living by supporting teachers. Like, if you know so much about teaching and you were so great at it, why did you leave the classroom? And those kind of questions used to bother me a lot because I felt like I had to prove my dedication to the profession. But those questions really don't bother me so much now because I have clarity on what is the best and highest use of my time and what I want my legacy to be. How would I ever have time to write a book, run a podcast, conduct professional development, all of these things I do professionally, while also devoting myself 100% to my students and practicing what I preach with work-life balance? I had to make a choice about where to focus my time. I had to think about where I could make the greatest impact. And this is my choice for now. Not everyone will like it. Not everyone will understand it, but I can't let their opinions determine how I spend my time. And the same thing holds true for you. Some people will try to guilt trip you or pressure you into saying yes to all kinds of commitments, even though they know that just being a good instructor for your students is more than a full-time job. It will take courage to cut out something that someone else thinks you should be doing. You will feel like you have to prove your dedication by doing more, but you don't have to prove anything to anybody. The day that I finally started to break free from that pressure was when I really began to enjoy my teaching and eventually have the courage to start sharing my ideas with other educators. I stopped trying to live up to other people's expectations for me. Their expectations were always unrealistic or just not rooted in what's actually important to me. And I got clarity on what really matters. You will always have too many things competing for your time. And if you don't decide what matters for yourself, you will always feel overwhelmed. So that's what I want to sort of express through this book to help you uncover what matters to you so that you have that courage and conviction to stand strong and not bow to outside pressure. So I'm going to share some excerpts from the book this spring on the podcast. You'll get to hear more of what it's about. And you can go to fewerthingsbetter.com if you want to be notified when the book is released. I'll probably have some sample chapters and some other stuff like that available later for those who are signed up. And in case you were wondering, yes, there will be an audiobook this time. This is going to be my first time recording an audiobook, and I am so excited to read this book to you. I am really passionate about the topic, as you can tell, and I know that's going to come through in the audiobook recording. I do plan to make my two prior books, Awakened and Unshakable, available in audio as well, but I don't know how much time I need to set aside for those projects, and they've been a pretty low priority. So after I record Fewer Things Better, I'll have a much better idea of what's really involved with this process, and then I can figure out how to schedule the recording of my other books onto my calendar. Now, in terms of publishing the book, I am actually the author and the publisher. I am not self-publishing though. I have an actual publishing company. I started it in 2008, and it's called Due Season Press and Educational Services. I don't really use that name very often except on invoices and more formal paperwork and stuff. So even if you've been following me for years, you might not know that's the name of my company, but that's it. That's the official name of my business, is Due Season Press and Educational Services. So what that means in terms of the book is that I have full control over just about everything. I get to have final say on the cover, on the back cover copy, the editing, everything. That was the reason that I started a publishing company. I actually started off with a publisher on my first book, which is in 2008, and I felt so taken advantage of. I was making like 43 cents a copy on a book. And you may not realize this, but most authors really don't make more than maybe $1 a copy. Like the profits for authors are pretty low. Maybe $2 if you're lucky. In general, with traditional publishing, it's not very profitable for authors. And the first time that I published, like I said, the book was selling for like $32 and I was making 43 cents. So I started educating myself on all the ins and outs of the publishing process and, trying to make sense of the industry and learning how to advocate for my rights. And by the time I was done, which was a lengthy nightmare and involved me eventually winning a case in small claims court, by the time I went through all of that, the silver lining was that I knew so much about what publishers were supposed to do and how their job actually worked that I was ready to start my own company. I knew enough at that point to do it right. So I did. And so far I have only published my own books, not books of any other authors. That may change in the future, but I need to do fewer things so I can do the things that remain even better, right? So it just hasn't been the highest priority yet, maybe down the line. So far, I just publish my own books. I contract with a printer and a distributor to produce the books. So there's a company that's what they do for authors and for publishing companies. So they do all the printing, they distribute, they send everything to the bookstores or to anyone that orders. And I basically sell all the books through Amazon. I used to sell them on my own site and mail them all out myself, which was kind of crazy. I don't do that anymore. Now just everything through Amazon, unless you're buying an ebook, which you can buy from my site. The publishing process is actually a lot simpler than it seems. So if you feel like you have a book inside of you and you're wanting to publish, know that self-publishing or starting your own publishing company are both totally valid options. And really, I feel like they get easier and easier the more that people are doing this. So that's part of the reason really why I started my own company. I just really like the ability to say whatever I feel needs to be said without censoring myself to fit a publisher's preference. It's a lot of extra work because now obviously I have to find the graphic designer for the book cover. I have to oversee everything. But I like having that control. I like feeling like this book is a true representation of me. And because I don't have to answer to a publisher or to a school district, I work for myself. I answer ultimately to myself. I can write the books that I feel teachers need to read. I can say what is on my heart to say, and that's really my number one goal. I don't have to worry about making my message palatable to corporations or districts or compatible with other authors under the publisher, nothing. I don't have to conform to anything. And that kind of freedom to me is priceless. It's worth the headaches that are involved in having to oversee the process more than a typical author would. So I can set my own deadlines for books, which I don't normally do until close to the end. I begin writing usually with a rough outline of the table of contents, just, some of the things that I want to make sure I write about in the book. And I do it all in Google Docs. I just kind of add to it slowly over time until I feel like I've built up enough momentum to say, okay, time to shape this thing up. That's usually when I have around maybe like 30,000 words. So it's close to halfway written. Most of my books are around 70 to 80,000, I would say. So once it gets to around the 30,000 mark, it's close to halfway done. And I start thinking at that point about refining the table of contents and how the book should be organized. It gets to that place where it's like, okay, I'm just writing random things now. I need to know how this all fits together. This needs to start flowing. Like I get really agitated with it. I feel like I can't write anymore until I have the organization. So I go back to that table of contents and rethink the sections and everything. And then I'll go back to the writing process and finish fleshing out the ideas. And that's the point where I usually set a deadline because I'm so sick of the book by that point. I'm just ready to have it done so I can move on with my life and start thinking about other things and other projects. I usually try to finish a chapter a day at that point. So I will reread every single word to make sure it is exactly what I want to say. And then I take a break from the book for about a week or so, and I'll go back in. And this time I'll try to read a section a day and check the flow between the chapters. And then I'll take a break for another week, and then I'll try to read the whole thing in one setting. After that, I pass off the Google Doc to be proofread. And then I'll go back through and I'll reread and I'll make small tweaks like, probably 5, 6, 7 more times. It's just terrifying to think of releasing a print book to the world. I've shared that with you all before. I can edit a blog post. I can, change the audio file for a podcast. But once something's in print, it needs to be something that I can 100% stand by for a very long time. And that is a lot of pressure. So I try to do different read-throughs at the end for different purposes. I read through the lens of a super fan who loves my work and make sure that I'm really speaking to them and giving them what they need. Because that's really who I'm writing the book for, right? Is the people who get me. I also read it through the lens of a hater, someone who's going to pick apart and misconstrue every word and write that 1-star review for me on Amazon. I try to think through what are the things I'm going to be criticized for, and do I want to change something here, or do I, how am I going to handle that? Am I sure that this is what I want to say, knowing that some people aren't going to like it? And there's a lot of stuff like that in Fewer Things Better, by the way. I definitely feel like this is my most controversial book to date, for sure. So I read through that lens. I read it through the lens of an administrator. What will a principal think reading this? Through a parent. What would a parent think reading this? And so on. And I just try to consider how different people will receive this book. But I only do that at the very end after it's done. Because otherwise, all of those different readers would, thinking about all those different readers would confuse and muddle my message. I have to begin by writing from my heart and saying what I believe needs to be said and say it the way that I need to say it. So I write for myself first, and then at the end, I edit for everyone else and make sure that this is, something that's going to speak to a wide variety of people. So that's where I'm at in this process for Fewer Things Better right now. Currently, or I should say probably concurrently, I'm having the book cover designed, and I'm going to be sharing those on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So if you follow me on any of those channels, you'll be able to vote on your favorite cover image. I definitely want your input because I always struggle with titles and designs are hard for me to come up with. So I want your input on that for sure. The process from there is going to involve having the book formatted for print as well as for ebooks. And that's a task that I hire a contractor for. And there's more technical stuff too that I won't bore you with. I will also be creating some free downloads to go with the book. So there's exercises in there to help you figure out what Fewer Things Better looks like in your life. And I want you to be able to download all of that like in a printable PDF or a typable PDF so that you can do that separately and not have to write in the book, particularly for people who are doing an audiobook. You need something written down for you. So I'll be making that too and working with my team to get all of those formatted and available. So there's a lot of moving parts, but I think the most difficult part for me will always be the fear of what people will think. Every book that becomes popular gets some bad reviews. I guarantee that whatever your favorite book is, think about the book that you love most in the whole world. It just rocked your world. It's your favorite thing. You could read it 1,000,000 times. I guarantee you it has a 1-star review on Amazon. I guarantee you. There's someone who said, I didn't get it. That wasn't what I was expecting. This is total garbage. This is whatever. Or just nitpicked it, found one thing in the book they didn't like, and then wrote the whole thing off. That's the nature of this. And the fear and anticipation of what people will think about something that I have poured my heart and soul into, that makes all the decisions around publication and launching the book much harder. It's very emotionally charged. So I have to continually practice what I preach, standing in my truth, standing in my clarity about what is important, and reminding myself that it's okay if other people don't like it. For some people, this book is going to be life-changing. I know it will be because I wish I'd had this book when I was in the classroom. I wish that I had known and practiced and embodied all the things in this book back then, because it would have completely transformed my experience, not only in my work with students, but in the way that I live my life. So readers of this book get to learn from my mistakes and the things that I wish I'd done differently. And some of you I know will experience such a radical sense of empowerment and agency from reading this book that it really will change your life. And those are the people that I've written this for. It's for all of you who also have these same questions rattling around in your brain. Why is busy our standard for a productive day? Why is that a badge of honor in our culture? How can teachers push back on all the unnecessary things that they're pressured or forced to do with students? What really matters in our lives? How can we create more space for those things? So, part of me is nervous, but I'm mostly just really excited to share this book with you. It'll be out sometime this spring. I'm thinking probably early April. And, my preparation for that is priority number one in the coming weeks. The writing and publishing process is not easy, but it's worth it. And the same is true for the self-reflection process that you'll go through as a reader of this book. It will step on your toes in places. It will cause you to re-examine the way that you've made your life choices. It will cause you to step out of your comfort zone. But yes, even though it won't be easy, I promise that self-reflection process will be worth it. Thanks for listening, and thanks for letting me share my heart with you around this book.